Something that is always fascinating in true crime investigations is the amount of work that goes into alibis and false stories. Some killers are terrible at it, barely trying to get the cops off the scent. Others give it everything, with incredible pieces of fiction that make them look like sympathetic victims. Keith Smith was the latter. Today's true crime documentary uncovers the truth behind the story of the tragic murder of Jacquelyn Smith. We will see how her family went to great lengths to cover up the truth and ultimately failed. Please leave your comments below. Was the final verdict for her stepdaughter fair or too lenient for the part she played? Some true crime investigations often seem too unbelievable to be true. More often than not, we end up describing cases of brutal murders and intense relationships that we wish were works of fiction. Today's story is the opposite. We have a man who went to incredible lengths to go on camera and create an amazing fake story about his wife's death. All the while, he was actually covering up his own crimes. In this video, we're going to delve into the remarkable story of Keith Smith and his wife, Jacquelyn. The original story of Jacquelyn's death made the news in Baltimore and beyond, and served as a warning to anyone trying to do a good deed in the city. However, further investigation found that things weren't as they seemed. Keith was far more involved than he let on. Keep watching to learn the amazing piece of fantasy Keith created to try and keep the police away from his door. You also won't believe the lengths this man went to try and get out of the country, nor the stress that he put on his daughter. Before we learn more about Keith and the doomed road trip to Mexico, let's take a moment to talk about Jacquelyn and her death. The murder of Jacquelyn Smith. Jacquelyn Smith was a 52-year-old electrical engineer in Baltimore. One evening in December 2018, she was returning home in her car from a family gathering with her husband and daughter. She did not make it home alive because, on that journey, she received a fatal stab wound to the chest. The original story that made the news in 2018 shocked the local community. Jacquelyn's husband, Keith Smith, told the police that his wife was attacked after a good deed. He claimed that Jacquelyn rolled down her car window to give $10 to a female panhandler who apparently had a small child with her. Her male accomplice then ran up to the car with the pretense of thanking her for her kindness. That was when the men reached in to grab her wallet. A scuffle began between them, and the man stabbed Jacquelyn in the chest. It is reported that Keith Smith then called 911 and rushed his wife to the hospital.
Just felt moved to give her something. So at the stop sign, she waved her over to come on over to the car, and then out of nowhere, some guy came over while walking with her. And I hit my window, and Jacquelyn went to hand the money out, and the guy just leaned over and said, "Can I thank your wife?" And I said, "You can thank my wife." And within that split second, this guy commenced to stabbing my wife. Blood was everywhere. It was something that, it was horrific for something like that to happen. But I'm right now just absorbing all of it.
The level of detail in this story was crucial. Keith painted a detailed picture of the people responsible, while his distraught daughter backed him up. It was so in-depth that the police, media, and Baltimore community were on their side for a long time.
Using this ruse as panhandlers to get the attention of their would-be victim. And we also want to caution the public about engaging with panhandlers and recognizing the fact that not all of them have honest intent. Not all of them are in real need.
They even put out descriptions of the pair, hoping that someone would come forward with information. The woman was in her 20s and around 5'4" with a brown jacket. It could have been anyone. The man was in his 30s, about 6'5", and had a goatee. The addition of the goatee was just the sort of extra physical feature to make the man distinctive without overdoing it. Now, there are quite a few reasons why this murder case caught our attention, and we had to tell you all about it. If you are new here, welcome. Hopefully, you'll hit that subscribe button and join our community. You might not be familiar with some of the dark, twisted tales we offer. We dive into the theories and gory details to expose the true nature of some deceptive murderers. This case is no different, because this ended up being one of the most fantastical cover-up stories we've heard. Keep watching to see the culprit get a brilliant dose of karma for his lies and failed attempts to flee the country. A story too good to be true. The story of the panhandlers gained even more press attention when Oprah Winfrey began tweeting about it. She was once a newscaster in Baltimore, before becoming a global icon and interviewer. She saw news reports and said that it would make her think twice about giving out money to people on the streets. What if other people out there had the same idea and wanted to lure innocent women in to die for their money? Keith Smith didn't stop there in his attempts to vilify panhandlers in Baltimore and seek justice in his wife's name. His face was all over news reports as he repeated his story and urged people not to trust beggars on the streets. He even began lobbying the city to bring in new laws, banning panhandling at intersections in the city. According to the police, the coverage worked, and they saw a drop in the number of people engaging with panhandlers in the city. The problem with this tall tale is that the cops were still working on their investigation to find out exactly what had happened. There was no evidence to suggest that any of those characters existed, let alone attacked Jacquelyn Smith. They had also begun asking around about Keith. So what actually happened here? Were Keith and Valeria Smith to blame? Well, it turns out that Keith Smith created this whole story with the panhandlers to cover up his own crimes. It was a good idea in theory. What is easier to believe? That a crazed man, possibly high on drugs, tricked and stabbed an innocent woman on the streets, or that her husband drove her to a park and stabbed her? For most people, it's probably the former. People begging and living on the street are an easy target because it is so hard to identify them. There is also a level of distrust around beggars, where the public would easily turn on them and suspect the worst. However, most true crime fans know that there are far too many cases of men killing wives out of resentment, jealousy, or pure hatred. As soon as Keith's story stopped adding up, and the police noticed his movements didn't match his statement, it was game over. Maybe Keith knew he wouldn't get away with it forever because he put a lot of work into fleeing the country. So what actually happened, and why did he kill her? Why did Keith Smith kill Jacquelyn Smith? Now we know that it was Keith Smith who killed Jacquelyn. We're left with even more questions. What happened that night? Why did he do it? What does his daughter have to do with it all? It seems that it was true that Jacquelyn was in the car with her husband and his daughter on December 1st, as stated. However, they never stopped to interact with anyone. Instead, Smith drove to a park and stabbed her himself. Significant data from cell phone and Google records places Keith and Valeria Smith at the scene at the time of the murder. They were the only ones obviously there at the time of her death. Valeria, who was 28 at the time, became an important part of the investigation. While it seems that it was only Keith who had the motive and drive to kill Jacquelyn that night, Valeria was a witness and knew that her father's story was false. There are a couple of possible motives behind the attack. The one that police cite as being plausible is that Jacquelyn wanted a divorce. Further investigation into the pair's relationship found that it was strained and she wanted out. Members of her family were suspicious of him at the time of the initial inquiry. Her brother even went on record saying he believed Keith was responsible.
I knew it was phony. I didn't believe her husband at all. I knew something else happened. Why would he stay in the area with her in the car after the man pulled the chain from her neck, as he claims? It was too phony.
I was laughing then, and I knew it was a circus. I knew it was all for optics. I knew it was a show, and I was just laughing. And I knew this day would come. I didn't know it would come this soon.
Reports also show that a couple of days after the murder, Keith went into Jacquelyn's workplace for some paperwork. He was the beneficiary of her life insurance policy and was there to make sure he had all the information and files needed. Perhaps the idea of a big payout made him even more inclined to kill her. The most shocking revelation in all of this is that Keith apparently tried to have Jacquelyn killed before he took matters into his own hands. Following the calls for divorce, Keith contacted his brother Vic about needing to get rid of Jacquelyn. Vic apparently called back, but Keith didn't want to talk to him, claiming that everything got ears now. Clearly, he was afraid that someone might listen in or use the call against him in the future. Vic didn't respond to any further messages, and nothing else came from that interaction. However, he did mention it to a friend of Keith, who later told the police what he knew. It is not clear if anything else happened after the request for a divorce. It is possible that Keith had been planning this attack for a while, or simply became fed up with his situation. If it was premeditated, it was a strange choice to have his stepdaughter in the car with them at the time. Why drag her into everything instead of handling it all by himself? Failing to get away with murder. The crazy amount of details in this murder case continues way past the fabrication of the panhandler. Once Keith Smith had committed his crime, he went to a lot of effort to get out of town and make the most of the situation. It appears that Keith and Valeria moved to Florida together after the murder. Then there was the attempt to leave the country. Smith looked into different ways to leave the United States and escape justice. The problem was that he didn't have a valid passport. The investigation found details in his search engine history about how to get to Jamaica without a passport and where to get into Mexico without passing through a border crossing. It seems as though he wasn't bothered about the final destination, as long as he could get out unseen. He had even gone as far as to try and book flights with one-way tickets to Cuba and Canada. It is unclear if one was a ruse or if he and Valeria intended to fly in opposite directions. In the end, it didn't matter, because all of these attempts failed. He wasn't able to get a flight out of the country, and the pair eventually ended up driving out towards the Mexico border 3 months after the murder. Maybe they thought enough time had passed that their disappearance wouldn't be suspicious. Maybe they had had enough of being in the US and wanted to start a new life elsewhere.
Let's be realistic. We would all love to take a vacation to Mexico. You know, you get a chance to go to Mexico, you say yes. Your dad says, hey, you know what, let's head on down to Mexico, let's take a little family vacation, some R&R. I don't see there being any criminal element to that.
Mr. Smith is always innocent until proven guilty, and I haven't seen anything yet that proves him guilty.
Ultimately, the reasons behind this final escape attempt don't matter, because the police caught up with them close to the border. They had made it around 1,700 miles before they were brought back to face justice. The police caught up with them in Harlington, Texas.
In the course of our investigation, we developed evidence that Mr. Smith was leaving Maryland, so we made the appropriate national notifications, and the Texas State Police arrested him this morning.
We pursued the evidence from the very beginning, and these detectives were very tenacious, they were very thorough and dedicated.
These individuals took advantage of a situation, a city that is already dealing with its own problems. So we're looking forward to this cruel act being brought to justice.
The truth finally comes out. The case finally went to trial, where Keith Smith faced a life sentence for first-degree murder, and the prosecution tried Valeria as an accessory. Valeria Smith ended up with a much lighter sentence thanks to a plea deal. She agreed to plead guilty to her role in the crime and testify against her father. She told the courts the true story of what happened that night and how her father had influenced her. It turns out that Keith Smith was solely responsible for the fatal blows that killed Jacquelyn. He had driven out to Druid Hill Park, stabbed her, and then coerced his daughter into helping cover up the crimes. He made Valeria dispose of her mother's purse at a nearby bus stop. The idea here was that police would find it and tie it to the story of the panhandlers running off with it and ditching it. He then coached her on everything she should tell the police to make sure their stories were straight. It seems that while Valeria was far from innocent in all this, and certainly committed crimes to cover up her stepmother's death, she was heavily influenced by her father. This admission of guilt and the final decision to help the courts meant she received a 5-year jail sentence. She will have time in jail to pay for her actions and reflect on what happened, and then the chance to start over away from her father's influence. Meanwhile, her father received the maximum sentence possible thanks to Valeria's testimony and the nature of the murder.
A selfish act where he not only manipulated the hearts and the minds of a country, but he manipulated the heart and the mind of his of his daughter, who was addicted to drugs. He was able to utilize this elaborate scheme and story to prey upon her and who she was and her character.
He has a life sentence for Jacquelyn's murder and an extra 3 years on top of that for possessing a deadly weapon with intent to injure. The police didn't bring any charges against Keith's brother Vic after the apparent plot to kill Jacquelyn. The police are also certain that he played no part in the second attempt and had no knowledge about it. There is no evidence that he acted on any of his brother's requests in any way, and there is no communication about it between them. Justice at last for Jacquelyn Smith. What's great about this case is that it is pretty much open and shut. We aren't left with too many unanswered questions, because the trial tied most things up with a neat bow. We know that Keith wanted to claim the life insurance policy and had plans to kill Jacquelyn before the fatal stabbing. We know that he definitely stabbed his wife to death and that he concocted that amazing story to cover it up. He almost had the world fooled with that detailed panhandler story, and the way he coached his daughter helped. Yet, the truth finally caught up with him, and his desperate attempts to flee the country ended in disaster. Please let us know what you made of this tragic story in the comments section below. We can't ask our usual question of whether you think Keith Smith is innocent or not, but we are curious to know how you feel about the daughter's sentence. Is her 5-year sentence fair after that plea bargain, considering it was all her father's fault? Or do you believe she deserves longer behind bars for going along with the cover-up and trying to flee with him? Today's video was another example of a supposedly loving husband doing their best to cover up their wife's death and failing miserably. We love to see this sort of karma. There is no doubt that we will have similar tales in the future of spouses getting what they deserve for murder. Until next time, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and share this with other true crime fans.